you know, you're going to see some of those things come down. And so now is going to be a phenomenal time to capture more market share and to capture amazing talent. Just make sure you're optimizing for that rate of return.
Hey everybody, Roland, Frasier, and Ryan Deiss here with another episode of the Business Lunch Podcast. Wonderful to have you guys with us as we talk about various assorted and sundry things that we would talk about over lunch. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing exceptionally well. The kids are all back in school, which means that we're getting back into a rhythm. Again, I love the summer, but man, it's hard to get anything done when just you're being pulled in all these different directions. So I'm excited to have those little punks back in school.
Let's start talking about what is going on. I just had a conversation. I just interviewed Cameron Harold for one of our Business Lunch podcasts, and he was talking about Cameron runs the
COO
Alliance, where they basically have a whole bunch of COOs. It's the only mastermind I know about for COOs, and he was talking about, we were just kind of talking about what's going on after the podcast. And he said, have you seen like dramatic changes in acquisition lately? Like, getting customers. This is across, he said, at my business and across, I think he said 17 of the other people that were at his last meeting, that they're cutting costs because acquisition is down. He said those 17 were all in the areas of marketing. And so we started talking about that, but I know he said they went, I want to say that they, one of the businesses had gone 20 days with no sale. And I know that we had one of ours that went, was it 14 or was it longer than that?
It was about, I think it was 14 business days. So it was at least 20 days. Yeah.
Right. Of no sales, which is just insane in a service business. I know that we've seen that across a lot of the, we're recording this, by the way, in August, towards the end of the month. And so August summer is generally slower. August is usually the worst month. It's the worst month to do an event because most people are like wrapping up their vacations, going back to school with the kids and all that. You just mentioned that. And it's just not a time that a lot of people are focused on any kind of like discretionary business type stuff. You want to talk about that a little bit, about like, should people panic if they're seeing that happen right now, and whether they do or don't, what are the things that they ought to be doing, or just sit tight to see how things turn out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely panic. It's always the first option.
It's the safest course of action, right? Because you'll never be caught unaware.
Right, exactly. No, so this is really nothing new in terms of August and the summer months. And I get it. There's an entire Southern hemisphere that's like, it's winter for us. So bear with us. I think, most of our audience is in the Northern hemisphere. So I'm kind of coming at it from that mindset. But typically, summers are, especially if you're B2B, summers take a dip. Not the case for, certainly if you're in the travel or hospitality, then summer is where you're just crushing it. But if you're B2B, if you're service based, even a lot of non-travel hospitality, fitness kind of things don't do well in the summers. I think though a lot of us forgot that, because going back and certainly if you've started your business in the last 3 years, you've never actually experienced a normal summer, right? But historically, we would always panic in the summer because sales would always dip. And then finally, we decided, let's look at the data and look at the trends. And we realized, wow, they've always dipped in the summer and we've always panicked. And then they've always come back. And so what if we just don't panic? And so we finally began just to factor it into our planning, and it was okay. All that changed the summer of 2020. Obviously, with COVID, everything was up in the air. But certainly people weren't like taking the summer off like they normally would. There wasn't travel. Definitely the same thing happened in 2021. And not only were people not traveling, but because of all the money that the government pumped into the market, they had lots to spend. And they were spending it in ways that they typically wouldn't in the summer. They were going ahead and investing in stuff. Hey, they're working anyway. What's the point? We saw a lot of that in 2022 as well. And I think that this summer was the first summer when absolutely people are, they're going on revenge vacation because they haven't done it in a while. At the same time, let's be honest, economy is softening, interest rates are up. And I think everybody's sort of looking at it saying, I don't have as much cash in the bank as I used to. Sales have dipped because everybody's doing this. And now I think you're getting that panicky effect. What I think is going to be interesting to see, and what I think everybody should wait to see is, do you start to see stuff come back to quote unquote normal? And I'll explain what I mean by normal in just a second. But do things come back to normal September, October, or do they stay really flat? Do they stay down? If they stay flat and they stay down, I think it suggests that definitely there's greater macroeconomic forces at play here, which doesn't mean that you should just panic, keel over, and die. There's opportunities to capitalize in those times as well. But if they do come back, then look for them to come back to not what they came back to last September and October or the one before that. Go back to 2019. What was your quote unquote normal September, October in 2019? If they come back to that, I think we can generally assume that it's going to be fine. It was the usual summer dip. We forgot because it's been a couple of summers, but everything should be fine. If it doesn't, if it stays as slow, then I think it's cause for not panic, but I think it's cause for thoughtful concern and thinking, okay, now what do we do? What does this mean?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. That revenge travel, when I first saw that, I was like, what the heck is revenge travel? And it's like revenge against the pandemic. It's kind of a funny thing, but I think you're right. And I think that we looked when we saw across several of the businesses, we saw sales dipping or off from certainly a couple of months ago. And we were like, okay, well, this is just the summer thing. And then initially we looked back and said, okay, well, let's look at how do we do last summer? But that's not fair because of all the things that you mentioned. So when you guys are kind of looking at, well, I know we can't look at like the last couple months to see, but let's look at the same period for last year or the year before or the year before. None of those are particularly valid because they're impacted by all of the COVID pandemic stuff and the stimulus programs and all that. So I guess don't panic is generally good advice. Never panic. Always try to be proactive. But I think that we look at September, October, and then that's going to probably tell us, are we going to go into a recession? Because if things don't come back relatively quickly to normal, then it's going to impact everybody. So if we see it at the business level, that will trickle down to everything else. That can lead to layoffs. That can lead to deferred spending for major assets and a lot of those kinds of things. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Speaking of recession, do you have any thoughts on where things are going there right now? As far as, we see interest rates continuing to go up. We see basically none of the normal correlations, those relationships between interest rates going up, for example, and house prices falling. None of that seems to be happening, at least yet. Doesn't seem like there's any big thing that's going to cause that to change. I know that in our real estate business, inventory on houses for sale is down 75% off of where it normally is. So it's not likely that's going to change. What's your recession thinking?
So I don't think you can conflate what's happening in the real estate market with what's going to happen in the rest of the business world, because the real estate market, it's all supply and demand. In real estate right now, you're not seeing home prices drop because nobody wants to move out of their house with their 2.3%, interest. And so that's the big thing there. There just isn't any inventory if there's no supply. And even if demand drops, then that's just going to keep prices where they are. Yep. And so I don't think that you don't have that same impact and that same effect in other places of business, right? If I had a really massive SaaS contract and I've got an annual renewal coming up for that software, I'm going to look at it pretty closely and say, do we really need this big a contract? Heck, maybe we just did a RIF, we just did a reduction in force, and we don't even have this many people here. Yeah. So even if I still value it to the same amount, I'm not going to be as valuable because I don't have as many people. And so I think everybody's looking for opportunities to make cuts. That is now the mindset that exists. And so whether or not we go into a recession, I don't know. What I do believe is I don't think that there are many CEOs out there who are making decisions, or even people, consumers. I don't think there's a lot of consumers out there making decisions about in what sectors of my life or business am I going to spend more.